That's not going to work. I'm a legacy Rotarian. My dad was an officer of Rotary. And I want to tell you something. This is the hokiest group I have ever been before. This is the small town that I grew up in, that formed me, that made me what I am. Someday I'll tell you all how Rotary saved my father's life, which he did. He gave us 9 more years. Growing up in a small town, where your father owns the factory, is a very difficult thing. At 6 years old, I was handed the end of a sheet, and it had a red cross in the middle, and my mother said, "You are marching in the 4th of July parade, and people will throw money, and don't drop that corner," right? At 10, I was making chocolate chip cookies for the soldiers. Unfortunately, I got chicken pox, and my mother had to call and tell everybody that whole camp may have gotten chicken pox from me. How did I end up in Charlotte? Well, my daughter went to college in Charleston, and I came up here, and if you know me, I like my fingers and things. All right, I think I'm going to change the world and make it better. And when I moved up near University Place, I saw these Z's going up. And I lived on a little farm to market road, and all of a sudden, I couldn't figure out what those Z's were. So I kind of got involved, and I started an organization called the Northeast Coalition, which was a coalition of homeowners groups. From there, I got to be a planning commissioner. When my Tim died, within a few months, I got called by the chairman of the planning commission. He said, "Claire, there's openings on the city council run." I said, "Are you out of your mind?" I had never run for anything. I'd been appointed to things. A half hour later, one of the women on the council called, and on the planning commission called and said, "Claire, run. You know what I think? I was saying no so much and making so much trouble, they wanted me off the planning commission. They figured better on the city council." I ran. I shocked myself. I spent $9,000, mostly of my own money, because if you know me, I don't like to ask for money. I've never sent a letter. I have never picked up a phone and asked. I did it on $9,000. This time I did it on 36, and I still won. I don't like to be obligated. I was brought up in a small town to be very independent, not to take. The first term, I didn't even take a cup of coffee from anybody. I wouldn't let them pay for it. I'm changing for this term because I think at this point they know that you can't buy me. I'm going to do what I think is right. I am one of those people. I had old Yankee teachers. Some came over on the Mayflower. I believe Thomas Jefferson. You do your duty to your country, your state, your city, and then you go home. And I will go home eventually. Well, I have to say, I'm like Claire, I love to ask for money. Okay? So, just fair warning, I'm just letting you know. Yeah, it's what I do. And it's part of what I love. But it didn't get there overnight. Was born in rural Michigan, the third of 4 children, and I was behind 2 boys and ahead of 1 other girl. And my mom said she noticed right away that I was a little bit different from the boys because at 8 months she said my bottle went sailing across the room, and she said, "Oh, I guess you're done with that." And I was. And before I was 2, I was dressing myself really badly. All of my buttons were in the wrong holes, but I was constantly trying to do it myself. Very determined. My mom said that determination is still evident today. And you know, it really is a good thing because when you're in philanthropy, you need to be pretty determined. So it wasn't an overnight thing. There were 3 things from my childhood that I think really shaped why I do what I do today. One of them, I was raised in the Quaker church, not with the black hat thing. A rural church in Michigan, and one of the things that was really strong about the Quaker church that I was raised in, which was a country church, was the idea that you need faith, you must have equality, and social responsibility is not your neighbor's, it's yours. And so my Sunday school teacher at that time was the niece of Laura Havlin, and Laura Havlin had established the first Underground Railroad stop in Michigan.
and ran the Underground Railroad for many, many years. And through that, I understood that we were all equal. There was not any of us that God loved better than the other. And so that sense of responsibility to each and every person was really something that was taught inside the church, which was a phenomenal gift to me. And women were educated equally with men. Women were elders and pastors in the 1830s. When Laura Hadlin was doing her work, it was not unheard of in the Quaker faith, but it was unheard of in society. And so during the time that I was raised in the Quaker church, the faith that was handed down to me for many generations was really very strong. And so my faith became strong. It was personal, it was individual, and my prayer life became very powerful. And so that, combined with the way that I was raised, really forged a very strong determination, but also great leaning on faith. And we needed that because my family had many struggles, and one of the struggles that we had was the three of us older kids, school was easy. We went to school, we loved school. School was fun, school was a great place. Education was marvelous, but then my sister came along and education wasn't marvelous. And her struggle became my family's struggle, because school was not the same for her. We used to hide our report cards every time they came out because we didn't want for her to be disappointed, because school was hard. She learned differently. She didn't learn the same way that we learned. And so it was a struggle every day. And it became a lifelong struggle for us and our family. And because our public education system wasn't set up for a different learner, it ended up that over time, we became advocates for her. Day after day, advocating for whatever it was that she needed. And that was a great lesson for me. And so I ended up in teaching. Not a surprise. And I went to school, I ended up in teaching, and I loved it. But then I felt the call to move to North Carolina. Didn't know why, just knew I was supposed to be here. So I picked up and moved. And when I got here, education wasn't quite the same as it was in Michigan, because in Michigan at that time they paid you. Go figure. And you know, that thank you just doesn't really pay the rent. I'm sorry. So I decided, well, you know, I was the third child, and you know what that means. The first child has to be responsible, the second child's fighting to be the first child, and the third child just goes and does what they want. And so as third child, I said, well, that's fine. My mother's a school teacher, my dad was a sales manager, I'll try that. So I loved sales, and I got into sales and management and became the branch manager of a staffing agency. And I was having a really good time, but you know, that itch to do something in public service, to do something in advocacy. I fell in love with a young man who had multiple disabilities and began to advocate for him and his family for the things that he needed. Well, that meant that I got on the radar of several different organizations, and I ended up on the board of directors. 2 months later, I was working for them. And so I was part of First and Families, and while I was part of First and Families and really enjoying, because life was starting to come full circle, sales, teaching, and advocacy, nonprofit was calling my name. And I really was enjoying it, but at that time I thought, you know, this is great. I think I'll go get a master's degree. I had started that before I left Michigan. So I decided I'll go get a master's degree, but for 6 months, all I could hear was something entirely different. And that was about adoption and foster. And foster care and adoption, oh, that sounded really tough. I thought the master's degree sounded a lot easier. So I kept thinking, I'll go get information about master's degree, and the next thing I knew, I was seeing it everywhere. Billboard ads, go to the doctors, it's in the magazine. Everywhere I went for 6 months, I couldn't get away. My church, people were adopting in my life that were friends of mine. So finally I went to pick up a pizza for the organization. The next thing I knew, the woman starts talking about foster care and getting ready to adopt a child, and that was it. That was it. I couldn't take it anymore. I went out, I threw that pizza on the top of the car. I threw my hands up to heaven and said, all right, if you'll just lighten up, I'll take the class. And I signed up the next day to take the class for foster care because I couldn't take the internal combustion anymore. And they said, oh, Jennifer, you probably won't get a child. And I said, you know, that's really okay. Because I was drafted. I didn't really sign up for this willingly, so I was drafted. So everything went along. I had my little certificate, had the bedroom ready, but I wasn't going to get a kid because, you know, I was in that small category and they just didn't think they would have one for me. So I went on about my business doing worked in the nonprofit sector, and I got a brand new job as the assistant director at the Arc of Mecklenburg, and I started my first day, and at 4 o'clock the phone rang, and guess what? I had 30 minutes to make a decision. Because there was a little girl who was 7 years old, she was at the hospital, she was emergency placement, and they needed a place for her. 30 minutes that changed my life forever. That 7-year-old showed up 4.5 hours later on my doorstep, and I fell in love. And today she's 20 years old, she'll be 21 in July. She became my adopted daughter 2 years later, after the courts released her. And she really has brought such a tremendous gift into my life, but she was a broken child standing on that doorstep. She was a child that needed more than to be loved. She needed a life-changing experience, and so did I, frankly. And so today she has moved out. As of Sunday, she moved out into an apartment of her own. She's working full-time, going to school, and I couldn't be more proud. And life couldn't be richer. And so my philanthropic movement has involved wonderful organizations like the American Red Cross, Discovery Place. I did the fundraising for Discovery Place Kids. But today, I've now done another full circle because I'm at the John Crosland School, which used to be Door Academy, due to John's wonderful and extraordinary relationship with the school. We've changed the name of the school. John understands our students because John had dyslexia his whole life. He understood their struggle as I understood my sister's struggle, and as I understand the struggle of the families that come to us. I cannot tell you what it's like every day to know that what I couldn't do for my sister, I can help to provide for other children and other families. And every day when I see the joy as children come in and they begin and they're struggling and life is hard and their families are frustrated, and then 30 days later those kids are as mellow and happy and successful as you can imagine, it helps me to reconcile the things in my life. And so philanthropy, building relationships that bring resources together to meet the needs of individuals, families, and communities. It's why we're here. It's why you're here. It's why I'm here. But the work that we do at the John Crosland School every day for children with learning differences, attention differences, and Asperger's is a phenomenal and wonderful gift to this community. And I hope if you're ever having a bad day and you need to pick me up, you'll call me and come over. Because those kids are changing every day. And their lives and their families' lives are changing every day. And that's what we're here to do. Thank you.
Well, they both took my line. Because Chris used to be a friend. I think I'll try these glasses. How many of you remember Minnie Pearl? For the younger ones, she used to be on Grand Ole Opry. And when she would appear, one of her favorite comments, oh, Charlotte, I'm just so glad you're here. And I confess, I feel the same way for 38 years as I've been a Rotarian. The genius of Paul Harris and his Jolly Band devised Rotary wonderfully. For almost 40 years, I worked in the Davidson College Library, 31 years as director, and I love my job, truly. But I love driving in to be with all of you, because you're bright, informed, funny, achievers, contributors, nice folks. And you didn't have a bone to pick about what was happening in the library. or confront me with something that I've been worried about all week. We talk about people, places, and things. And we learn about the wonderful programs. I look forward to the drive in with anticipation, the drive home energized. And I'm grateful to and for you. I'm not a Presbyterian, but I really think I was predestined to be a Rotarian. I was born in 1941 in Alexandria, Louisiana, where my dad was stationed in the Army. I'm 72, they'll save you having a surprise. My Alabama mother and Georgia father met and married in Orlando, and that's where I grew up or was raised up. My dad was a member of the large Orlando Rotary Club. For 48 years of perfect attendance. The only reason he didn't make 49 was that he was translated to the club upstairs. Rotary was just a big part of our life, of his life, and because of that, it was a big part of our family life. We planned trips, parties, house guests, even planned hospitalizations around the Wednesday meeting at the Rotary. And when we were traveling, he sought out makeup places. Back then, women and young ones were not included, so my mother and I would find another place for lunch somewhere. Happily, as you know, that's changed. When I graduated from Macaulay in 1959, my graduation present was that he took me to New York for the Rotary International Convention. It was thrilling. So many wonderful people from so many wonderful places. The programs were wonderful. It made me feel grown up and laugh. I still remember, and I hope maybe you might, Victor Moore giving a phonetic reading. One thing that impressed me that Rotarians were special folks was during a summer trip. Our car broke down in a small Mississippi town. On a hot day, we waited around for a good while at a service station that looked right out of a Faulkner novel, while a talented mechanic did his wonders to get us back on the road. As he finished, I remember so well my dad saying to him, "My friend, I don't carry that much cash with me, and the banks aren't open. Will you take a check?" He didn't even pause. He said, "Good sir, I see on the rear window of your car a Rotary decal. That's good enough for me. I'll gladly accept a check from a Rotarian." You gotta know that 60 years later, I remember that incident as if it were yesterday. Rotary stands for something bigger than ourselves. Just as an aside, I graduated miraculously, to my parents' surprise, from Davidson. That's true too. Got a master's in library science at Emory the next year, and worked for about a year at the Charlotte Mecklenburg Library on North Tryon Street as a lowly reference librarian. Interestingly enough, 50 years later, I was appointed to the library's county board, coming full circle. Then I completed my ROTC duty as a captain in the Army, working at an induction station, and during the Cold War, successfully kept the Russians out of Raleigh. You're welcome. Then I got a job at the library at Davidson in 1967, staying there except for 2 years when I slipped off to Florida State to get a doctorate. But Davidson has been home, though I have a small condo in 4th Ward and go to church at St. Peter's Episcopal Church. I got invited to join another service club, but politely declined. I wanted to stay in the will. And I truly did want to be a Rotarian. White Galvin, former president of this club, and a longtime director of the Charlotte Mecklenburg Library, and my first boss, got me introduced, and I belonged to the West Charlotte Club for a few years, a grand group of men. Then I was invited to join this club, since at that time, there were other Davidson folks who drove in each week, and I thought the commute would be easier. What a wonderful association it's been. And again, my dad's contribution to my Rotary life was evident. For he gave me a check once for my birthday and said, "This should cover you being a Paul Harris Fellow." And it did. I was honored to be elected to the board for a term and then proudly served as secretary during the administration of the inimitable David Zimmerman. Also during that term, the club was a part of building a Habitat House. Being on the board, I figured I really should show the flag and participate. Now you should know that I'm not the most athletic or carpentry proficient member of this club. But one of my real heroes in this club is proficient that way, Tom Robertson. Is he here today? I can tell him thank you personally. I got to the site. I blocked out the exact location on purpose. Real early. I mean real early for a Saturday when you're still working. And Tom said, "Come on up." So So I climbed up the scaffolding with him and held siding as he nailed it up and made it plumb. Up we went to the scaffolding. So finally I said, Tom, this is as high as I can go. He said, great. Get on the ground and hand the boards up to him. And that I did. Tom up there and I down there. We were still going strong, about 4 or 5 when we quit. I was grateful he never made fun of me. And I fled home. When I stopped the car in the drive, this is all true. I turned and could hardly get out the car. I was so sore. I went inside, drew a hot bath, got an adult beverage, and sat with a book in there for 2 hours. It was a Rotary experience I'll always remember, and Tom remains a hero in the museum. I was blessed with 2 wonderful parents, both gone now, and I don't have brothers and sisters, but I've been able to select my family, and I think I've done a good job of that. For I've selected you in this club as part of that family, and I'm grateful to you. Oh, by the way, my father was never a Paul Harris fellow. But with this check, for Katie Tower, he'll be made one.